The testing chamber hummed with the kind of silence that makes your nerve clusters itch. You know the type. That awful pregnant pause before something monumentally stupid happens. I should have known we were in trouble the moment Commander Vrail strutted into the observation deck with that smug ridge flare he always got when he thought he'd outsmarted someone. Spoiler alert, he hadn't. Attention, all assessment personnel, Vrail announced, his vocal sac inflating with self-importance. Today marks a historic evaluation. We will finally determine which species among our newest applicants possesses the tactical acumen worthy of Galactic Council membership. Right, because that had worked out so well the last 16 times. I'm Crix, by the way. Junior Observer. Which is a fancy way of saying I get paid to watch things go sideways and file reports nobody reads. 3 cycles into this job, and I'd already seen enough diplomatic incidents to fill a small library. But this was going to be special. I could feel it in my lower stomachs. The candidates filed into the chamber below. 5 species, each convinced they were the apex of tactical brilliance. The Vraxian delegation moved first, all chitinous swagger and clicking mandible. Behind them came the Thessian twins Mara and Kale, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with synchronized confidence. The Qualtari representative Breck slithered in next, leaving a trail of significance that the cleaning drones would complain about later. Then Horvath, a Dendarian who looked like someone had given a tree trunk anger issues in military training. And finally, sitting apart from all of them, utterly unremarkable in her plain gray jumpsuit, the human. She looked, well, bored, actually. Maybe 19 solar cycles, maybe 20. Short, by human standards, I'd guess. Dark hair pulled back in something humans called a ponytail, which I'd always found redundant since she clearly had no tail. She'd introduced herself as Riley Kowalski 3 days ago, and since then she'd done absolutely nothing to stand out. No preening, no strategic positioning, no networking with the other candidates. She just sat there, watching everything with these unnervingly calm brown eyes, occasionally checking her fingernails like she was waiting for a transport that was running late. The other candidates had already dismissed her. I'd heard Breck refer to her as the soft-skin afterthought just yesterday. The Vraxians didn't even bother learning her name. Big mistake. Huge. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The scenario is simple, Vrella continued, activating the holographic display. The chamber floor shimmered, then transformed into a 3-dimensional tactical map. You are a diplomatic envoy arriving at a neutral station for peace negotiation. Intelligence suggests an assassination attempt will be made. Your task: identify the threat before it strikes. Vrel paused for dramatic effect. He loved. You will be given access to station surveillance, passenger manifests, and behavioral analysis data. The first candidate to correctly identify the assassin wins. The others. His ridge flared, intensified. Well, let's just say the Galactic Council has limited membership slots. I glanced at my fellow observers. Talus, a weather-worn Korthan who'd been doing this for 30 cycles, just sighed and pulled out his probability calculator. 5 credits says the Vraxian causes a diplomatic incident within the first 10 minutes. 10 credits says someone tries to hack the simulation, countered Yenner, her tentacles already dancing over her datapad. 20 credits says the human does something completely incomprehensible. I muttered. They both looked at me. What? I've been reading the reports from Earth. These creatures are walking probability violations, Talus snorted. She's barely moved in 3 days. I think you're safe. Oh, Talus. Sweet. Naive Talus. The simulation began. Immediately, the Vraxian candidate, a specimen named Trask, began barking orders at the imaginary security team. Seal all docking bays. I want full spectrum scans of every being within 50 sectors. Weapons charged. Shields maximum. That's not how diplomacy works, Yenna murmured. That's not how anything works, I corrected. Meanwhile, the Thessian twins had taken a more analytical approach, splitting the surveillance feeds between them and processing data with their linked neural matrices. Efficient. Logical. Absolutely by the book. Breck had slithered to a control panel and was attempting to cross-reference passenger manifests with known criminal databases. Also reasonable, if somewhat pedestrian. Horvath just stood there, looking constipated. Dendelarians weren't known for their quick thinking, and Riley had walked over to the refreshment dispenser and gotten herself something that looked like a hot beverage. She carried it back to her seat, sat down and resumed watching. Just watching. Is she doing anything? Talus asked, leaning forward. Drinking coffee, apparently, I said, squinting at my monitor. At least I think it's coffee. Might be a human combat stimulant. Hard to tell with the 5 minutes in, Trask had accidentally sealed himself inside a supply closet in the simulation. The security override he'd attempted had backfired spectacularly. We could hear his muffled cursing through the audio feed. And there's the diplomatic incident, Tully said, collecting his credits from Yenna. The Thessian twins were making progress, methodically eliminating suspects based on travel patterns and behavioral baseline deviations. Solid work. Textbook even. They'd probably identify a suspect within the hour. Breck had gotten tangled in his own data queries and was now swimming through 17 different database windows, each contradicting the last. Horvath remained constipated looking, and Riley took another sip of her definitely coffee, probably weapon beverage. This is embarrassing, Rel muttered from his command position. The human hasn't even accessed the data feeds. Should we disqualify her? Give it time, Commander, said Senna, our senior evaluator. She was old, even by Leferan standards, and she'd seen things. Humans rarely do what you expect, when you expect it. Rel's ridge flare dimmed skeptically. 15 minutes passed. The twins had narrowed their suspect pool to 3 individuals, a Korthan trader with a suspicious travel history, a Vraxian with diplomatic immunity that seemed too convenient, and a maintenance worker who'd been hired just before the summit. Candidate Mara. Candidate Kale. Please submit your primary suspect for evaluation, Vrel announced. The maintenance worker, they said in perfect synchronization. Access patterns indicate deliberate positioning near critical infrastructure. Background check reveals falsified credentials. Probability of hostile intent. 73%. Not bad. Not bad at all. Vrel checked his evaluation matrix. Incorrect. The maintenance worker is a planted red herring. Please continue your analysis. The twins' bioluminescence flickered with irritation. But they dove back into the data. Trask had finally escaped his closet prison and was now attempting to interrogate a simulation character by shouting at it. This was going about as well as you'd expect. 30 minutes in, Breck submitted his analysis. The Korthan trader. Wrong. The trader was legitimately just a trader with a messy travel itinerary because he kept getting lost. Breck slithered away in embarrassment. Horvath finally moved, lumber-stepping to a console. He spent 5 minutes staring at it before submitting his choice. The Vraxian, with diplomatic immunity. Also wrong. That Vraxian was actually an undercover council auditor checking for security vulnerabilities. Well, said Rel, this is disappointing. 45 minutes had elapsed. The twins were recalibrating their analysis parameters, clearly frustrated. Trask had somehow managed to trigger a false evacuation alarm. Breck was sulking. Horvath had gone back to standing still, and Riley finished her coffee, stood up, stretched like someone who'd been sitting through a particularly boring lecture, and walked up to the central console. Every observer in the deck sat up straighter. She didn't access the surveillance feeds, didn't pull up the manifests, didn't run any behavioral algorithms or probability matrices. Instead, she tapped one button, pulling up a single camera angle that showed the station's main concourse. She studied it for maybe 10 seconds, then she pointed at the screen. That one, she said. The Deltharian in the blue environmental suit near the air recycling junction. 3rd column from the entrance. That's your assassin. Silence. Complete. Absolute. The universe is holding its breath. Silence. Vrel's mouth parts hung open. That's... You can't possibly... You haven't even reviewed the data. You've been sitting there drinking that primitive stimulant for 45 minutes, Riley shrugged. You asked me to identify the threat. That's the threat. On what basis? Vrel sputtered. What analysis? What evidence? She turned to look at him, and I swear I saw the faintest hint of amusement in those brown eyes. He's the only person in that entire station who's been standing in the same spot for 45 minutes without once checking his communication device, looking around at his surroundings or showing any sign of normal waiting behavior. He's positioned himself with clear sightlines to 3 critical choke points in the main negotiation hall. His environmental suit is rated for Deltharian atmosphere, but Deltharia has a trade embargo with the hosting station's primary species, which means there's no legitimate reason for him to be here. She paused, taking a breath. About 11 minutes ago, when the evacuation alarm went off because Captain Loud and Wrong over there can't work a security panel, everyone in that concourse reacted. Panic, confusion, movement. Everyone except Blue Suit. He flinched, then forced himself to stay still. That's someone fighting trained instincts. That's someone who knows moving will complete a trigger sequence too early. Another pause. The room had gone so quiet I could hear my own circulatory system. Also, Riley added, almost as an afterthought, his suit's power readings are wrong. The thermal signature suggests he's running additional equipment that's not standard for an environmental suit. Probably a weapon, possibly an explosive device rigged to the station's air recycling system, which would explain the positioning, flood the negotiation hall with toxic atmosphere, kill everyone, blame it on system failure, clean, efficient, plausibly deniable. She crossed her arms. Did I get the job? Vrel activated the analysis protocol with shaking appendages. The simulation's evaluation matrix ran its deep scan on the Deltharian she'd identified. Every indicator lit up green. Hostile intent confirmed. Concealed weapon confirmed. Explosive device confirmed. Target, negotiation hall. Method, atmospheric contamination. She'd nailed it. Every single detail. How? Vrel managed. How did you see all that? Riley tilted her head slightly. I didn't access your fancy databases or surveillance grids because I didn't need to. You gave me eyes, Commander. I used them. Everything I needed to know was in how people moved, where they positioned themselves, what they did naturally versus what they forced themselves to do. Body language doesn't lie, even across species. Especially when someone's trying to be invisible. Tallis slowly turned to me. You called it. 20 credits. I don't want to collect, I whispered. I'm too busy being terrified. The other candidates were staring at Riley like she'd just spontaneously manifested extra limbs. The twins' bioluminescence had gone completely dark with shock. Trask had stopped mid-rant. Even Horvath looked less constipated and more disturbed. Riley just stood there, hands in her pockets, looking like she was waiting for someone to tell her where to collect her luggage. Well, Senna said, a note of what might have been amusement in her crackling voice. I suppose that's conclusive. This is impossible, Vrel protested. She's had no formal tactical training. Her species has barely achieved faster than light travel. They're not even a recognized council member yet. How can she possibly outperform candidates with decades of military and intelligence experience? Riley's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those brown eyes. Something that made my survival instincts scream. With respect, Commander, she said, voice polite but with an edge that could cut steel. My species has been identifying threats since we were hiding from predators in caves with nothing but rocks and attitude. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and each other for hundreds of thousands of years on a planet that's actively trying to kill us. We didn't out-evolve the threats, we out-thought them, out-adapted them, out-stubborned them. She glanced back at the screen showing the Deltharian assassin. You built a test to see who could use your fancy technology and databases to find a needle in a haystack. That's fine. But humans? We learned a long time ago that the best way to find a needle is to watch where everyone else isn't looking. Because that's usually where the problem is hiding. I see, Vrel said, though he clearly didn't. So, Riley continued, should I assume I passed? Or do you want me to explain how there's also a secondary team planning to hit the station's power grid as a distraction? Because I noticed 3 engineers all converged on sub-level 9 about 20 minutes ago and none of them have moved since. Every head in the observation deck whipped back to the displays. Yenna's tentacles flew across her console, pulling up sub-level 9 surveillance. 3 engineers, clustered around the main power junction. Tools out, not moving. Just waiting. Mother of the Void, Tallis breathed. Riley smiled then. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that suggested she'd been holding that information back just to make a point. And suddenly, I understood why Earth's application to the Galactic Council had been flagged for special review. Not because humans were primitive or aggressive or unpredictable, but because they'd figured out something the rest of us had forgotten over millennia of technological advancement. Sometimes the most sophisticated weapon isn't the one you build, it's the one you're born with. Candidate Kowalski, Senna said, her old voice carrying authority that made even Vrel shut up. Welcome to the Advanced Evaluation Protocols. Report to Briefing Room 7 in 1 hour. Yes, ma'am, Riley said, then turned and walked out of the chamber like she'd just aced a quiz on basic mathematics. The remaining candidates just stood there looking at each other with expressions that ranged from confusion to existential dread. Well, I said into the stunned silence. I'm going to need to revise my report. Your report? Yenna said. I'm going to need to revise my entire threat assessment protocol for human integration. If one unarmed human in a classroom setting can outperform our best candidates. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We were all thinking the same thing. What happens when Earth sends their actual soldiers, spies, and tactical specialists? Rel had collapsed into his command chair, ridge flare completely deflated. This is going to be a very long evaluation cycle, he muttered. Commander, Talus said gently. I think that's the point. The briefing room. 7 was, in my professional opinion, exactly the kind of place where careers went to die. Small. Sterile. Containing 1 table, 6 chairs, and an ambient lighting system that made everyone look vaguely ill. I'd been in here exactly twice before, both times to witness spectacular failures of diplomatic judgment that resulted in multi-species incidents requiring formal apologies and reparation payments. Today promised to be different. Worse. Probably. Definitely more interesting. I arrived early because I'm nosy and also because my job description technically includes monitoring all evaluation proceedings. Totally legitimate. Not at all because I wanted a front row seat to whatever fresh chaos was about to unfold. Senna was already there, her ancient frame folded into a chair that had been specially modified to accommodate Lithuran physiology. She was reviewing something on a datapad, her sensory fronds twitching in what I'd learned to recognize as either deep concentration or profound concern, possibly both. Crix, she acknowledged without looking up. You're here to observe the humans' advanced evaluation, if permitted, senior evaluator, permitted and encouraged. She finally glanced at me, her compound eyes reflecting the room's terrible lighting in unsettling ways. I want multiple perspectives on record. This situation is rapidly exceeding our standard assessment parameters. That's one way to put it, I muttered, taking a seat against the wall where I'd be out of the way but still able to see everything. The door opened. Riley walked in looking exactly as unimpressed with briefing room 7 as everyone else who'd ever been sentenced to it. As she'd changed clothes, I noticed. Instead of the gray jumpsuit, she now wore what I'd learned was called a hoodie and jeans. Casual, comfortable, completely inappropriate for a formal council evaluation. Somehow on her it looked like a tactical choice. Miss Kowalski, Senna greeted. Please. Sit. Riley dropped into a chair across from Senna, with the kind of graceless efficiency that suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. So what's the next test? Find the hidden bomb. Spot the spy. Explain why everyone in the galaxy uses the same door mechanisms when species have wildly different appendage structures. I choked on my own respiratory cycle. That last one was actually a legitimate complaint I'd heard from accessibility advocates for cycles. Senna's fronds rippled in what might have been amusement. Nothing quite so dramatic. I simply wish to understand your methodology. Your performance in the initial assessment was, to put it mildly, unprecedented. I looked at the screen and used common sense, Riley said with a shrug that somehow managed to convey both honesty and mild insolence. Not really complicated, perhaps not for you. Senna set down her datapad. But your common sense appears to be remarkably uncommon among even our most experienced tactical analysts. Walk me through your thought process. From the moment you entered the testing chamber, Riley leaned back in her chair, eyes going slightly distant like she was replaying a recording in her head. Okay. First thing I noticed was the other candidates. Everyone was so focused on looking impressive, proving they were the smartest being in the room. The Vraxian was all aggression and authority posturing. The twins were showing off their synchronized processing. The slug guy, the Koltari, was trying to demonstrate database expertise. And the tree, the Dandelion, was doing the strong silent type routine. And this told you what, exactly? Senna asked. That they were all playing a game. Performing. Which meant they were more worried about how they looked than what they were actually supposed to be doing. Riley's expression shifted, becoming more focused. Meanwhile, your commander was so proud of his clever test that he basically told us the answer in his setup. He said intelligence suggests an assassination attempt will be made. Not might be, will be. That's certainty. Which means the threat isn't theoretical, it's active and already in position. I found myself leaning forward despite my attempt to remain professionally detached. So I knew 2 things immediately, Riley continued. 1, there was definitely a threat in the simulation. 2, it was already there, just waiting. That narrowed the search parameters considerably. I didn't need to analyze hundreds of suspects. I needed to find one person who was already exactly where they needed to be to do maximum damage. Senna's fronds had gone completely still. Continue. After that it was just watching. Humans are really good at watching. It's like our thing. We're persistence hunters. Back on Earth before technology, we'd chase prey animals for hours, sometimes days, not by being faster or stronger, but by being patient and paying attention, noticing when something was tired, when it was hurt, when it changed its pattern. That instinct doesn't go away just because we invented computers. She paused and I got the distinct impression she was editing her thoughts for her audience. Interesting. So while everyone else was buried in data feeds and algorithms, I just watched the station. Watched how people moved, where they congregated, what they were doing with their hands, their attention, their body positioning, and the Deltharian stuck out immediately because he was the only one not doing anything natural. He was frozen, actively forcing himself to be still. That's a red flag the size of a small moon. And the secondary team? Senna prompted. The engineers on sub-level 9. Riley's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. That was pattern recognition. 3 specialists converge on a critical system right before a major diplomatic event. Either they're responding to an emergency, in which case there should be more activity and communication, or they're creating an emergency. Since nobody seemed stressed or rushed, option 2 seemed more likely. Plus it's textbook distraction tact. Hit them high, hit them low, cause chaos, exploit the confusion. Textbook. Senna repeated. What textbook? Earth isn't part of the Council educational system. You shouldn't have access to our tactical doctrine. I don't. Riley met Senna's compound gaze without flinching. But humans have been running cons, planning ambushes, and executing coordinated attacks since before we had written language. The specifics change, the technology evolves, but the underlying psychology stays the same. Because, at the end of the day, most species think in similar patterns when they're planning violence. It's efficient, it's proven, and it works, until someone recognizes. The room fell silent. I was frantically taking notes on my pad, trying to capture the casual way Riley had just deconstructed what we considered advanced tactical theory and reduced it to basic evolutionary behavior patterns. He seemed remarkably comfortable discussing violence, Senna observed. Not an accusation, just a statement. Riley's expression didn't change. My species has been at war with something or someone for most of our recorded history. We're good at it. Really good. That doesn't mean we like it, but pretending we don't understand it would be stupid and dangerous. You asked Earth to send candidates for council evaluation. We sent someone who could do the job. That's me. Are you military? I blurted out before I could stop myself. Riley glanced at me, seeming to notice me for the first time. No. University student. Majoring in anthropology with a minor in conflict resolution studies. I applied for the evaluation program because it seemed interesting and I was bored with my summer schedule. She was bored. She casually dismantled a senior-level tactical assessment because she was bored. Anthropology, Senna said thoughtfully. The study of human cultures and behaviors, and by extension any culture or behavior. It's all pattern recognition and social dynamics when you get down to it. Doesn't matter if you're studying ancient Earth civilizations or contemporary alien species. People are people. Even when they're not people, they have motivations, fears, social structures, communication styles. Learn to read those, and you can navigate pretty much any situation. That's a rather reductive view of complex diplomatic and tactical scenarios, Senna said, but her fronds were doing that rippling thing again. Maybe. Riley shrugged. But it's worked so far. Senna was quiet for a long moment, her sensory fronds processing information in ways I couldn't begin to interpret. Finally she spoke. Miss Kowalski, I'm going to be direct with you. Your performance today has created a significant problem for this evaluation committee. Because I made everyone else look bad? Riley's tone was mild, but I caught the edge underneath. Because you've demonstrated that human cognitive patterns and threat assessment capabilities are fundamentally different from established council species norms. Not inferior, not superior, just different. And the council doesn't know what to do with different. Riley nodded slowly, like this was exactly what she'd expected to hear. So what happens now? Do I get rejected because I don't fit your templates? Or do you adjust the templates? That, Senna said, is what we need to determine. Which brings me to your actual advanced evaluation. Oh, here we go. I gripped my data pad tighter. Senna activated a holographic display. Instead of a tactical scenario, it showed what appeared to be a diplomatic reception. Multiple species mingling, conversations happening in clusters, servers moving through the crowd with refreshments. This is a recording from an actual council reception 3 cycles ago. Somewhere in this event, a major diplomatic breach occurred that resulted in 2 species suspending trade relations for an entire standard year. Your task is to identify what happened, who was responsible, and how it could have been prevented. Riley leaned forward, studying the display. Can I control the playback? Full access to all recorded angles and audio feeds. Senna confirmed. Time limit? None. Take as long as you need. Riley's fingers moved over the holographic controls, rewinding to the start of the reception. She watched for maybe 30 seconds, then paused. Rewound again. Watched. Pause. There, she said, pointing to a cluster of beings near a buffet table. That's your problem. The Thessi ambassador just offered food to the Corthan trade minister using his left manipulation appendage. Senna's fronds shot straight up. How did you possibly catch that? Because the Corthan's body language completely changed. See? He goes rigid. His crest flattens. His respiratory rate increases. That's not just surprise. That's offense. Which means the Thessian just committed an insult. Probably cultural. And since he used his left hand, I'm guessing that's significant. Let me check. Riley scrubbed forward through the recording. Yeah, see, for the rest of the event, the Corthan avoids the Thessian completely. Won't even make eye contact. And here, when someone tries to introduce them later, the Corthan literally turns his back. That's deliberate. That's a response to a serious social violation. She looked up at Senna. I'm guessing in Corthan culture, the left hand is considered unclean or disrespectful for offering food. The Thessian didn't know, made an innocent mistake, but the damage was done. The Corthan interpreted it as a deliberate insult, probably assumed it was a political statement, and responded accordingly. Neither side backed down because neither side understood what actually happened. Classic failure of cultural communication. I checked the incident report on my pad. She was exactly right. The Thessian had indeed offered food with his left appendage, which in Corthan culture was reserved for waste disposal and considered deeply offensive in social contexts. The Thessian had no idea because it wasn't in the standard diplomatic briefings. The Corthan had assumed it was intentional because he couldn't imagine someone being that ignorant of basic cultural protocols. 6 months of trade negotiations destroyed because of which hand held a pastry. Prevention would be easy, Riley continued, already moving past her analysis like it was obvious. Better cultural briefings for all diplomatic staff. Make it part of mandatory training. Not just the big stuff like religious practices or political hierarchies, but the small stuff. The everyday social rules that people assume everyone knows. Because that's usually where the real problems happen. People can navigate big diplomatic issues. It's the little assumptions that kill you. Senna was absolutely still now. You identified the incident that took our best analysts 3 weeks to reconstruct, and you did it in under 5 minutes. It was pretty obvious once you know what to look for, Riley said. Body language is universal even when nothing else is. Every species has tells. You just have to pay attention. Show me another, Senna said suddenly, pulling up a different recording. This one. Riley barely glanced at it. Security chief near the entrance is about to have a medical emergency. See how he's favoring his right side. Reduced range of motion, shallow breathing. Slight discoloration in his skin tone. He's in pain and trying to hide it. Probably doesn't want to abandon his post during a high-security event. Give it about 10 minutes and he's going to collapse. Someone should pull him for a medical scan before he becomes a liability. Senna checked her records. The security chief had indeed collapsed 12 minutes into the event. Heart murmur that went undetected until he passed out at his station, causing a brief panic and security gap. Another, Senna demanded, and I realized she wasn't testing Riley anymore. She was trying to find the limits of this capability. If there were any. They went through 6 more scenarios. Riley called every single one. A smuggling attempt based on unusual cargo handling patterns. The potential coup identified from the way certain military officers positioned themselves relative to their government leaders. An espionage breach spotted because someone was too interested in seemingly random conversations. A financial fraud uncovered through inconsistent emotional responses to market discussions. Every time Riley didn't just identify the problem. She explained the psychology behind it, the cultural context that made it possible, and how it could have been prevented with better awareness and communication. By the end, Senna looked like someone had just recalibrated her entire understanding of threat assessment theory. Miss Kowalski, she said finally, her voice carrying a weight I'd rarely heard. I need to ask you a direct question and I need a direct answer. How common is this capability among humans? Riley considered for a moment. The level of formal training I have. Pretty rare. Most people don't study anthropology or conflict resolution. But the basic skills, the ability to read people, recognize patterns, understand social dynamics, that's pretty standard. Every human does it to some degree. It's how we survived. It's how we built societies. Some people are better at it than others, just like any skill, but the fundamental capacity is universal. She paused, then added quietly, "We're a social species living on a dangerous planet. We had to get really, really good at understanding each other and everything that might want to kill us. That doesn't go away just because we invented spaceships." Senna turned to me. "Crix. Note for the official record. Human cognitive capabilities in pattern recognition, behavioral analysis, and threat assessment exceed Council standard baselines by significant margins. This is apparently a species-wide trait, not an individual anomaly." Noted. I managed, though my manipulators were shaking slightly as I recorded her words. Secondary note. Current evaluation protocols are insufficient for accurately assessing human candidates. Recommend complete revision of testing standards and establishment of specialized integration procedures. Also noted. Senna looked back at Riley. "You're free to go, Miss Kowalski. We'll contact you within 2 standard days with the committee's decision regarding Earth's Council candidacy." Riley stood nodding politely. "Thank you for your time, Senior Evaluator." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you all so surprised? You invited Earth to apply. You had to know something about us. Did you really think we'd send someone who couldn't handle your tests?" Senna's fronds rippled in what I was now certain was amusement. "We expected competence, Miss Kowalski. What we got was a demonstration that everything we think we know about tactical assessment might be fundamentally incomplete." Riley smiled then. "A real one this time. Yeah, humans have that effect. Fair warning, if Earth gets Council membership, that's going to happen a lot. We don't mean to be disruptive. We just think differently. It's kind of our thing." She left, and the door closed behind her with a soft hiss. Senna and I sat in silence for a long moment. "We're going to approve Earth's application, aren't we?" I said finally. "We don't have a choice," Senna replied. "A species with those capabilities operating outside Council oversight would be exponentially more dangerous than inside it. At least this way we can work with them, learn from them, and maybe, just maybe, teach them a few things they don't already know." "And if we can't?" I asked. "If they really are that far ahead of us in practical threat assessment." Senna's fronds did something I'd never seen before. They drooped, almost like a human shrug. "Then the galaxy is going to get very interesting very quickly. And we'd better hope humanity decides we're worth keeping around." She stood, gathering her materials. "Draft the approval recommendation, Crix. Mark it Priority 1, and make sure someone tells Commander Vrel before he hears it through unofficial channels. His ridge flare can't handle another shock today." I watched her leave, then looked down at my notes. Pages and pages of observations all pointing to the same conclusion. Earth had sent their best, and their best was just a bored college student with a knack for watching people. I really didn't want to know what their actual professionals could do. Somewhere in the facility, Riley Kowalski was probably getting another coffee, completely unaware that she'd just reshaped galactic diplomatic policy. Or maybe she knew exactly what she'd done. With humans, I was learning it was impossible to tell. And that, more than anything else, was what made them so terrifying, and so absolutely essential.